The autumn rain fell upon the city with that peculiar insistence which belongs to October evenings, when the year begins to turn its face towards darkness and the world seems bent upon reminding all living creatures of their mortality. In a penthouse apartment high above the glittering streets which now seemed to mock him with their distant, indifferent beauty, Sebastian Ashford sat before a dead computer screen, his reflection staring back at him like a ghost of the man he had been merely 3 weeks prior. The screen was black, utterly black as his prospects, as black as the void into which his entire fortune had been cast by forces he could neither see nor comprehend. 3 weeks ago, Sebastian Ashford had been a name whispered with reverence in the corridors of venture capital firms and technology conferences. His portfolio had included 17 companies, each one a glittering jewel in the crown of modern innovation. He had possessed the kind of wealth that rendered money itself abstract, a mere concept rather than a tangible concern. His days had been filled with decisions that moved markets, with emails that could make or break careers, with the intoxicating sensation of being, if not master of the universe, then certainly one of its more significant landlords. He had worn custom suits that cost more than most people's monthly wages, had drunk wine from bottles whose labels bore dates from before his birth, had signed contracts with a pen that had once belonged to a railway magnate of the previous century. He had been, in short, exactly what the world told him a successful man should be, but that was before the hack. That was before everything he had built, everything he had accumulated, everything that had constituted the very definition of Sebastian Ashford had been stripped away with a precision that suggested not merely criminal intent, but something approaching artistic malice. It had begun on a Tuesday morning. Why are such catastrophes always heralded by the most mundane of days? When Sebastian had awakened to find his phone displaying a message that his primary email account had been accessed from a location in Eastern Europe. This alone had not alarmed him. He traveled frequently, and his security team was always adjusting protocols and testing systems. But when he had attempted to log in to verify the notification, he found himself locked out. Then, in the space of time it takes for a heart to complete 3 beats, he had been locked out of everything else. His secondary email, his banking applications, his investment accounts, his cloud storage, his social media profiles, even his smart home system, which had begun playing a song he did not recognize at a volume he could not control. By noon that day, as he sat in his lawyer's office, an office he had reached by calling his driver from a neighbor's phone, as his own devices had become bricks of metal and glass, the full scope of the attack had become apparent. Every account he possessed had been compromised, every password had been changed, every security question had been reset. More devastating still, his cryptocurrency holdings, the bulk of his liquid assets, had been transferred to addresses scattered across the digital ether like seeds cast into a hurricane. His stocks had been sold in panicked bursts that triggered market surveillance systems. His companies had been locked away behind layers of digital paperwork that would take months, if not years, to untangle. And throughout it all, his identity itself had been stolen, replicated, weaponized against him. The hacker, or hackers, for no one could say with certainty whether this was the work of one malicious genius or an entire syndicate, had left no trace, no fingerprint, no boastful message claiming responsibility. They had simply taken everything and vanished into the labyrinthine depths of the internet, leaving Sebastian Ashford with nothing but his name, and even that had been rendered suspect. Within 48 hours, articles had appeared in financial publications questioning his solvency. Within a week, investors had begun distancing themselves from his ventures. Within 2 weeks, the penthouse apartment, this very apartment in which he now sat, surrounded by furniture that had been selected by an interior designer whose fees could have fed a family for a year, had been seized by creditors who moved with the efficiency of locusts. He had hired experts, of course. He had retained the services of cybersecurity firms whose reputations were forged in the defense of governments and global corporations. He had consulted with forensic accountants who could trace money through shell companies and offshore havens with the skill of bloodhounds following a scent. He had even, in a moment of desperation that he would later recall with burning shame, contacted individuals whose business cards bore no company names and whose offices existed only as post office boxes, the sort of people who operated in the grey spaces between law and lawlessness. None of them had been able to help him. The hack had been too thorough, too sophisticated, too perfectly executed. It was as if Sebastian Ashford the millionaire had been erased from existence, leaving behind only Sebastian Ashford the man, and the man, he was discovering, was a far more fragile creature than he had ever imagined. Now, sitting in what would soon be someone else's apartment, wearing clothes that had once been tailored to his measurements, but which now hung upon him with the looseness that comes from stress and insufficient meals, Sebastian found himself contemplating a question he had never before considered. Who was he without his money? The question terrified him, for he suspected the answer might be no one at all. The rain continued to fall, and with it came the evening. And with the evening came hunger, not the refined desire for cuisine that he had once satisfied with reservations at establishments where one waited months for a table, but the simple animal need for sustenance. He had $12 in cash, the last remnants of the emergency money he had kept in a drawer for purposes he could not now recall. He had no credit cards that functioned, no bank account he could access, no investments he could liquidate. He had $12, and with those $12, he would need to feed himself for however many days remained until what? Until the lawyers untangled the mess? Until the cybersecurity experts found a lead? Until some miracle restored what had been taken? He did not know. He picked up his phone, a new one, purchased with the last of his accessible funds before those too had been frozen, and opened a delivery application. The app itself seemed to mock him with its cheerful interface, its bright colors and promises of food arriving in 30 minutes or less. He scrolled through options with the grim determination of a man making calculations of survival. Chinese food, too expensive. Thai, beyond his means. Indian, out of the question. But pizza, that most democratic of foods, that great equalizer of human hunger, pizza he could afford, barely. He placed an order for the cheapest option available, a medium margarita pizza, no additional toppings, no sides, no drink. The total came to $11.47. He added a 53-cent tip, all that remained of his $12, and felt a surge of shame so profound that it manifested as physical nausea. He who had once tipped restaurant servers more than some people earned in a week was now leaving change that would not buy a candy bar. The app informed him that his order had been received, that it was being prepared, that it was out for delivery. He watched the little icon on the map move through the streets of the city, this city that had once felt like his domain and now felt like enemy territory. The icon drew closer, closer still, until it arrived at the base of his building. He made his way to the elevator. Soon, even this simple act of pressing a button would be denied him, and descended to the lobby, where the doorman who had once greeted him with warm familiarity now regarded him with the careful neutrality reserved for those whose circumstances have become uncertain. The delivery person was late. Sebastian stood in the lobby, watching through the glass doors as the rain continued its assault upon the evening, and with each passing minute, his hunger intensified. He imagined the pizza growing cold in whatever vehicle was meant to deliver it. He imagined the cheese congealing, the crust becoming soggy. He imagined, and then he saw her. She came running through the rain, a figure in a red jacket with a thermal bag strapped to her back, moving with a purpose that suggested either dedication or desperation. He could not yet say which. She burst through the doors of the lobby in a spray of water droplets, her dark hair plastered to her face, her sneakers leaving wet prints upon the marble floor that some underpaid janitor would later need to clean. She was young, perhaps 25, perhaps younger, with the kind of face that suggested both strength and vulnerability, the kind of face that belonged to someone who had seen enough of life's difficulties to be wary, but not enough to be bitter. "Ashford?" she asked, her voice slightly breathless from her run through the rain. "Sebastian Ashford?" "Yes," he said, and even to his own ears his voice sounded hollow, defeated. She opened the thermal bag and extracted a pizza box, which she handed to him with the efficiency of someone who had performed this action thousands of times. But as he took the box, their fingers touched for the briefest of moments, and in that touch he felt something he had not felt in 3 weeks, a connection to another human being that was not mediated by lawyers or security personnel, or the careful distance that wealth creates between people. "Rough night?" she asked, and there was something in her tone. Not pity exactly, but a kind of recognition, as if she could see past the expensive lobby and the designer clothes that no longer fit properly, past all the trappings of his former life, and perceive the essential fact of his current existence. He was suffering. "You could say that," he replied, "and perhaps it was the hunger, or perhaps it was the exhaustion of 3 weeks spent fighting an enemy he could not see, or perhaps it was simply the human need to be seen by another person without judgment." But he found himself adding, "Though I suspect your night hasn't been much better, running through the rain to deliver pizza." She smiled at that, a quick, genuine smile that transformed her face entirely. "At least I'm getting paid for it," she said. "And the rain isn't personal. It falls on everyone equally." There was wisdom in that observation, he thought, a kind of philosophical acceptance of circumstance that he had never needed to develop. When one possessed money, one could avoid the rain entirely, could travel from climate-controlled car to climate-controlled building without ever feeling a single drop of water upon one's skin. But now, standing in this lobby with this young woman whose name he did not know, Sebastian realized that he had insulated himself not merely from weather, but from reality itself. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it more deeply than she could possibly know, "for bringing this." "It's my job," she replied, but something in her expression suggested that she understood there was more weight to his gratitude than a simple pizza delivery warranted. She hesitated for a moment, as if considering whether to say something more, but then the moment passed, and she turned to leave. "Wait," Sebastian said, surprising himself with the urgency in his voice. She paused, looking back at him with curiosity. "What's your name?" "Maya," she said. "Maya Hernandez." "Maya," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt in his mouth. I know who you are," she said, and there was something in her tone that made him uncertain whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. "Everyone knows who you are, or who you were." She said this without cruelty, merely as a statement of fact. "The millionaire who lost everything to hackers. It's been all over the news." He felt the familiar burn of shame rising in his chest. But before he could formulate a response, Maya added, "For what it's worth, I think it's bullshit. What happened to you, I mean. Nobody deserves that." And with those words, simple, direct, offered without expectation of reward or recognition, Maya Hernandez turned and walked back out into the rain, leaving Sebastian Ashford standing in the lobby with a pizza that was growing cold and a strange, unexpected sensation blooming in his chest. Hope. He carried the pizza back up to the apartment and ate it mechanically, barely tasting the food, his mind occupied with thoughts of the delivery driver who had shown him more genuine kindness in 3 minutes than most of his former associates had shown him in 3 weeks. Maya Hernandez. The name played through his mind like a melody he could not quite place. There was something about her, about the directness of her speech, the lack of artifice in her manner, the way she had looked at him without the calculation he had grown accustomed to seeing in people's eyes, that had shaken something loose in him. When the pizza was gone, he found himself doing something he had not done in weeks. He opened his laptop, the one device the hackers had somehow overlooked, perhaps because it was old and rarely used, and began to write. Not emails to lawyers or investors, not desperate pleas to cybersecurity experts, but rather a simple document in which he attempted to catalog everything that had happened, every step of the attack, every detail he could remember. As he wrote, patterns began to emerge that he had not previously noticed. The timing of certain lockouts, the sequence in which accounts had been compromised, the way the hacker had seemed to anticipate every security measure he had implemented. It was nearly midnight when he stopped writing, his fingers cramping from the sustained effort. He sat back and read through what he had produced, 15 pages of dense text, a narrative of his own destruction. And as he read, a thought occurred to him that seemed both obvious and revolutionary. Perhaps he had been approaching this problem incorrectly. He had been trying to fight the hack with money, with hired experts, with the same tools that had failed to protect him in the first place. But what if what he needed was not more sophistication but less? What if what he needed was not another expert, but a fresh perspective? What if what he needed was someone who had nothing to lose, and therefore nothing to fear? What if what he needed was Maya Hernandez? The thought was absurd, of course. What could a pizza delivery driver possibly do that teams of cybersecurity professionals could not? And yet, the thought persisted. There had been something in her eyes when she looked at him, something that suggested intelligence and resourcefulness. And more than that, there had been her comment about the rain falling on everyone equally, a statement that revealed a mind capable of seeing past surface distinctions to underlying truths. He thought about her running through the rain to deliver his pizza, about the dedication that required. He thought about her smile, so genuine and unexpected. He thought about her words, "Nobody deserves that." And he made a decision that he would later recognize as the first truly independent choice he had made in his entire adult life. A choice not based on market analysis or investment strategy or the advice of consultants, but simply on intuition and a desperate need to trust someone, anyone, in a world that had revealed itself to be utterly untrustworthy. He would find Maya Hernandez. He would ask for her help. And perhaps, though he dared not hope for this too strongly, she would say yes. The morning arrived with that particular quality of light which follows a night of rain. Everything washed clean, the air sharp and clear, the world presenting itself as if newly made. Sebastian had not slept. Sleep had become a luxury he could no longer afford, not when his mind churned ceaselessly through scenarios and possibilities, each one leading to another dead end. But this morning, as he stood before the window watching the city awaken below him, he felt something different from the despair that had become his constant companion. He felt purpose. Finding Maya Hernandez proved easier than he had anticipated, though the ease itself carried its own burden of discomfort. In his former life, he would have delegated such a task to an assistant, who would have employed discreet inquiries and professional resources. Now he had only himself and the internet, and the latter had become a minefield of accounts he could no longer access and systems that no longer recognized him. But the delivery application through which he had ordered the pizza, that at least still functioned, though he had no money remaining to place another order. He spent the morning in the apartment's building lobby, a space he had previously traversed without truly seeing it, and discovered that the doorman, a middle-aged man named Henry, whose last name Sebastian had never learned, possessed a wealth of information about the comings and goings of delivery drivers. Henry regarded Sebastian with that mixture of sympathy and discomfort which seems to be the universal human response to witnessing another's fall from grace. But he was not unkind. "Maya Hernandez?" Henry repeated when Sebastian asked. "Sure, I know her. She delivers here pretty regular. Works for 3 different companies, I think. Pizza place, Thai food, sometimes groceries. She's usually around between 5 and 9 in the evening." "Does she have a regular route?" Sebastian asked, feeling absurd even as he spoke the words. He was a man who had once commanded boardrooms and negotiated with CEOs, and now he was interrogating a doorman about a pizza delivery driver, as if his life depended upon it. Perhaps it did. Henry scratched his chin thoughtfully. "She lives over in the old district, I think, near the university. I've seen her biking through sometimes when I'm getting off shift. You need to reach her for something?" Sebastian hesitated. How could he explain what he himself did not fully understand? This conviction that Maya Hernandez, of all people, might be able to help him when experts had failed. "It's complicated," he said finally. "But yes, I need to speak with her. It's important." Henry studied him for a long moment, and Sebastian saw in the man's eyes a calculation being made, weighing whatever loyalty he might have felt toward a former resident of means against sympathy for a young woman trying to make her way in the world. "I can't give you her address," Henry said at last. "That wouldn't be right. But I can tell you she usually stops at the coffee shop on Maple Street around 3 in the afternoon between shifts, the one with the blue awning. I've seen her there more than once." Sebastian thanked him with more gratitude than the information perhaps warranted, but Henry had given him something precious, a thread to follow, a possibility, a next step. He left the building. Soon it would no longer be his to leave, and began walking toward the old district, toward Maple Street, toward whatever waited there. The walk took him through parts of the city he had never truly observed before. In his former life, he had moved through urban space in cars with tinted windows, seeing the streets as mere connective tissue between destinations of importance. Now, walking because he had no other means of transportation, he saw everything. The homeless man sleeping in a doorway, the mother struggling with a stroller and 2 bags of groceries, the teenagers laughing outside a convenience store, the elderly woman feeding pigeons in a small park. He saw all of this, and he saw himself as he must appear to them, a man in expensive clothes grown shabby, walking with the purposeful stride of someone who had somewhere to be but no particular hurry to get there. Because what did time matter when one had been cut loose from the moorings of routine and obligation? The old district was a neighborhood he had heard referenced in conversation but had never visited. A place where students and artists and immigrants lived in buildings that predated the gleaming towers of glass and steel that constituted his own world. The streets here were narrower, the storefronts more varied and particular. There were bookshops that sold used paperbacks, laundromats where people sat reading while their clothes tumbled, restaurants with handwritten menus in languages he did not speak. There was life here, abundant and immediate life, and Sebastian felt simultaneously drawn to it and alien within it, as if he had crossed some invisible border into a country whose customs he had never learned. He found the coffee shop with the blue awning easily enough. It was called The Daily Grind, a name that managed to be both earnest and self-aware. The interior was small and crowded, filled with mismatched furniture that suggested each piece had been acquired separately over many years. The walls were covered with flyers advertising room shares and used bicycles and yoga classes, and behind the counter, a young man with elaborate tattoos and a kind face prepared drinks with the focused attention of someone performing a craft rather than merely a job. Sebastian ordered a black coffee, the cheapest item on the menu, and found a seat near the window where he could watch the street. It was 1:30 in the afternoon. If Henry's information was correct, Maya would arrive in approximately 90 minutes. He settled in to wait, discovering that waiting, when one had no other obligations, became a form of meditation. He watched people pass on the sidewalk. He listened to conversations happening around him, students discussing an upcoming exam, an older couple planning a dinner party, 2 women commiserating about difficult bosses. He was, he realized, for the first time in perhaps his entire adult life, simply present in a moment without simultaneously planning the next one. Maya arrived at 3:15, appearing suddenly through the door as if summoned by his thoughts of her. She was dressed differently than she had been the previous evening, jeans and a grey sweatshirt instead of the delivery company's uniform, and she carried a worn backpack that looked heavy with books or supplies. She did not see him immediately. She went directly to the counter and ordered something complicated that involved several modifiers, speaking to the tattooed barista with the ease of someone who came here regularly. Sebastian felt his heart rate accelerate, a physical response that seemed disproportionate to the situation. What was he afraid of? that she would refuse to speak with him, that she would think him insane, that she would confirm what he increasingly suspected, that he had built his entire identity upon foundations of sand, and now that the money was gone, there was nothing substantial left. She received her drink, something topped with an elaborate swirl of foam, and turned to find a seat, and it was then that she saw him. Her expression shifted through several stages: recognition, surprise, confusion, and finally something that might have been concern. She approached his table with visible hesitation. "Mr. Ashford," she said, framing it as a question, though she clearly knew who he was. "What are you doing here?" "Please," he said, rising to his feet with a formality that felt absurd in this casual setting. "Call me Sebastian, and I came here to find you." "To find me?" She looked genuinely bewildered. "Why?" "May I buy you?" he began, then stopped, remembering that he had no money with which to buy anything. "May I speak with you for a few minutes? Please, it's important." Maya glanced around the coffee shop, as if seeking some explanation for this bizarre encounter in the faces of the other patrons. Finding none, she made a decision. "Okay," she said slowly. "I guess so, but I only have about 45 minutes before I need to get to work." They sat across from each other at the small table, and Sebastian found himself uncertain how to begin. How did one ask a stranger, a pizza delivery driver no less, to help solve a problem that had defeated experts? The request would sound insane. Perhaps it was insane. Perhaps he was insane, driven to madness by loss and desperation. "You're probably wondering why I tracked you down," he began, and immediately regretted the word tracked, which made him sound like a stalker. "I mean, why I wanted to speak with you specifically." "The thought had crossed my mind," Maya said, and there was a hint of humor in her voice that emboldened him slightly. "When you delivered the pizza last night," he continued, "you said something that stayed with me. You said what happened to me was bullshit, that nobody deserved it." "Yeah," Maya said cautiously. "I meant that. It's true. From what I've read, you were basically destroyed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. It's not like you did anything to deserve it. You were just targeted." "Targeted," Sebastian repeated. "Yes, that's exactly what it was. But here's what I've realized. Everyone I've hired to help me, the cybersecurity firms, the forensic accountants, the lawyers, they're all approaching this as if it were a technical problem. They're looking for digital footprints, for traces in code, for vulnerabilities in systems. But they're missing something fundamental." "What's that?" Maya asked, and he could see that despite her wariness, her curiosity had been engaged. "They're missing the human element," Sebastian said. "Whoever did this to me, they didn't just understand technology. They understood me. They knew which accounts to hit in which order. They knew where I kept my backup systems. They knew how I would respond to each stage of the attack. This wasn't just a hack. It was personal. It was designed specifically for me, by someone who knew me or who had studied me extensively." Maya nodded slowly. "Okay, I can see that, but I still don't understand what that has to do with me." Sebastian took a breath. Here was the moment of truth, the point at which his desperate gambit would either find purchase or reveal itself as the delusion of a desperate man. "Because you saw something in me last night that no one else has seen in 3 weeks. You looked at me, really looked at me, and you saw past the headlines and the scandal to the person underneath. And that made me think, what if what I need isn't another expert who sees this as a technical challenge, but someone who can see patterns in people the way others see patterns in code? You want me to help you find whoever hacked you?" Maya's voice carried equal parts disbelief and something else. "Was it intrigue?" "I know how it sounds," Sebastian said quickly. "I know I'm a stranger who happened to order pizza from you, and I'm asking you to get involved in something that's frankly dangerous and almost certainly hopeless. I have no money to pay you. I have no resources to offer. I have nothing except this conviction that you might be able to see something that everyone else has missed." Maya was quiet for a long moment, and Sebastian watched emotions play across her face. Doubt, interest, skepticism, calculation. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful. "What makes you think I have any skills that would be useful here? I'm a delivery driver. I dropped out of college. I have no training in cybersecurity or investigation or anything remotely relevant." "You dropped out of college?" Sebastian seized on this detail. "What were you studying?" "Computer science," Maya admitted reluctantly. "But I only completed 2 years before I had to leave. My mother got sick, and someone needed to work full-time to cover the medical bills and keep us from losing our apartment. So I left school and started delivering food because the hours were flexible and I could work multiple platforms simultaneously to maximize income." Sebastian felt a surge of something he had not experienced in weeks. The thrill of a hunch confirmed, of a pattern emerging from chaos. "You studied computer science," he said. "So you understand systems and code and networks. But you also understand something that none of the experts I've hired understand. You know what it's like to be vulnerable, to have everything at risk, to make decisions not because they're optimal, but because they're necessary for survival." "That's one way to look at poverty, I guess," Maya said, and there was an edge to her voice now. "Though I'd call it less of a skill and more of a circumstance I'd like to escape." "I'm not romanticizing your situation," Sebastian said, though he wondered if perhaps he was doing exactly that. "I'm saying that you have perspectives that I lack, that everyone in my former world lacks. We insulated ourselves from risk, from consequence, from reality, and that made us blind to certain things. Whoever hacked me, they understood vulnerability. They knew exactly where to apply pressure to cause maximum damage. To catch them, I need someone who understands both the technical systems and the human psychology of exploitation." Maya took a long drink of her coffee, and Sebastian waited, barely breathing, for her response. He knew he was asking something unreasonable. He knew that by any logical measure she should refuse, should walk away from this conversation and return to her life of multiple jobs and precarious finances. What could he possibly offer her that would make this worth her time? "Let me make sure I understand," Maya said finally. "You want me, someone who couldn't even finish a computer science degree, to help you catch a hacker so sophisticated that they defeated military-grade security systems. You can't pay me. You can't even promise that we'd succeed. And if we fail, I've wasted time that I could have spent earning money to keep my mother and myself housed and fed." Does that about sum it up? "Yes," Sebastian admitted. "That's exactly right, except for one thing." "What's that?" "I don't think we'll fail," Sebastian said, and as he spoke the words, he discovered that he believed them. Because everyone else has been trying to beat this person at their own game, trying to be more technically sophisticated, more clever with code, more advanced in their security measures. But we're going to do something different. We're going to figure out who they are as a person, what they want, why they chose me specifically, and we're going to use that understanding to find them. "You make it sound simple," Maya said. "It won't be simple," Sebastian replied. "It will probably be impossible. But I've spent 3 weeks watching experts fail. I've spent 3 weeks being the victim, the passive target, the man who had things done to him. I'm done with that. I'm ready to fight back. And I need someone who hasn't been trained to think about this problem in all the conventional ways that have already failed." Maya was quiet again, and Sebastian could see that she was genuinely considering his proposal, weighing it against her other obligations and needs. When she spoke next, her voice was thoughtful. "If I were going to help you, and I'm not saying I will, but if I were, I'd need to understand something first. Why did you become a millionaire? What did you actually do to earn all that money?" The question surprised him. "I was a venture capitalist," he said. "I identified promising technology companies in their early stages and provided them with funding in exchange for equity. When those companies succeeded, I profited from their success." "So you didn't invent anything yourself?" Maya asked. "You didn't code or build or create?" "No," Sebastian admitted. "I had the capital and the connections. I knew how to evaluate business plans and market opportunities. I understood what investors wanted and what entrepreneurs needed. And now all of that is gone, Maya said. The capital, the connections, the network, the reputation. If you had to start over from scratch, with nothing but yourself, what would you have to offer? It was a devastating question, cutting to the heart of everything Sebastian had been trying not to think about for 3 weeks. What was he without his money? What value did he have as a human being, stripped of all external markers of success? He wanted to say something impressive, something that would demonstrate his worth. But sitting across from this young woman who worked multiple jobs to keep her family afloat, who had sacrificed her own education for someone else's medical bills, he found he could not lie. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I honestly don't know. For my entire adult life, I've defined myself by what I had rather than who I was. And now I'm discovering that there might not be much of a who underneath all the what. But I do know this. I'm good at seeing patterns, at understanding how different pieces fit together to create larger systems, at recognizing when something doesn't fit, when there's an anomaly that deserves attention. That's how I became successful in the first place. Not through technical knowledge, but through pattern recognition. And I think that skill, combined with your technical understanding and your different perspective on vulnerability and power, might actually give us a chance." Maya studied him for what felt like an eternity. Then she pulled out her phone and checked the time. "I need to go," she said. "My shift starts in 15 minutes, and I can't afford to be late." Sebastian's heart sank. She was going to refuse, and he couldn't blame her. It had been a foolish idea from the start, born of desperation and wishful thinking rather than any rational calculation. But then Maya surprised him. "I work until 9 tonight," she said. "Meet me at the pizza place where I picked up your order last night, not inside, in the parking lot behind the building, 9:15, and bring everything you have related to the hack. Every email, every document, every piece of information about what happened and when. If I'm going to do this, and I haven't decided yet, I need to see everything." "You'll consider it?" Sebastian asked, unable to keep the hope from his voice. "I'll look at what you have," Maya said carefully. "That's all I'm promising. And Sebastian, if this is some kind of weird rich guy manipulation, if you're not being straight with me about what happened or what you want, I'll know, and I'll walk away." "Understood." "Understood," Sebastian said. "Thank you. Just for considering it. Thank you." Maya stood to leave, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. But before she walked away, she looked back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "That thing you said about pattern recognition," she said, "about seeing when something doesn't fit, that's actually what I was good at too back when I was in school. I could look at code and see where the logic broke down, where someone had made an assumption that didn't hold. My professor said I had a gift for it. So maybe you're not completely crazy. Maybe we can see things together that neither of us could see alone." And with that, she was gone, leaving Sebastian sitting at the small table with his cold coffee and a feeling that he had not experienced in so long he had almost forgotten its name: possibility. He spent the remaining hours until their meeting gathering everything he could find related to the hack. He went back to his apartment and printed out every document from his old laptop, timelines, screenshots, emails, the 15-page narrative he had written the previous night. He organized it all into a folder, and as he did so, he saw things he had not noticed before, small discrepancies, patterns within patterns. He began to make notes in the margins, questions that had not occurred to him when he was simply trying to survive each day. At 8:30, he left the apartment for what he suspected might be the last time. The eviction notice had been posted that afternoon, giving him 48 hours to vacate, and walked to the pizza restaurant. The parking lot behind the building was poorly lit, filled with employees' cars and delivery scooters and the smell of garbage from the dumpsters. He found a spot against the back wall where he could watch for Maya's arrival, and he waited. She came at 9:17, appearing on a bicycle that had seen better days, her thermal delivery bag still strapped to her back. She locked the bike to a railing and approached him with the same cautious determination he had seen in the coffee shop. "You came," she said, and he couldn't tell if she was surprised or simply stating a fact. "I said I would," Sebastian replied, "and I brought everything." He handed her the folder, thick with documents. Maya sat down on a concrete parking bumper and opened it, and for the next hour, she read. She did not speak, did not ask questions, simply absorbed information with an intensity that reminded Sebastian of how he had once read quarterly reports from companies he was considering investing in, looking not just at what was said, but at what was implied, at the spaces between data points where truth often hid. Finally, she looked up at him. "This is insane," she said. "The level of sophistication here, the planning, the execution. Whoever did this had access to information about you that shouldn't have been accessible. They knew things they shouldn't have known." "I know," Sebastian said, "which means it was either someone very close to me or someone who had been monitoring me for a long time. But everyone close to me had as much to lose from my downfall as I did. My business partners, my employees, my associates, they all lost money when I lost money. So if it wasn't someone with an obvious financial motive, then who and why?" Maya closed the folder and looked at him directly. "You really want to find this person, even if it means discovering things about yourself that you might not like, even if the truth is ugly." "I want the truth," Sebastian said, "whatever it is." "Okay then," Maya said, and in her voice he heard the sound of a decision being made, of a line being crossed. "I'll help you, but I have conditions." "Name them," Sebastian said immediately. "First, we're partners in this. Not employer and employee, not millionaire and delivery driver. Equals. We make decisions together and we trust each other's judgment equally. Second, I keep my jobs. I can't afford to lose my income, so whatever we do has to work around my schedule. Third, if we succeed, if we actually catch whoever did this and you get your money back, I want something." "Money?" Sebastian asked. "A percentage." "Not money," Maya said. "I want you to pay for me to finish my degree, computer science, full ride, wherever I get accepted. And I want you to cover my mother's medical expenses until I graduate. That's my price." Sebastian felt something shift inside him, a recalibration of values. 3 weeks ago, the amount Maya was asking for would have seemed trivial, a rounding error in his portfolio. Now, it represented more than he could guarantee, but it was also something real, something tangible, something that mattered more than the abstract wealth he had lost. "If we succeed," he said, "and I get back what was taken from me, I'll do better than that. I'll pay for your degree, your mother's medical care, and I'll set up a fund to ensure you never have to choose between education and survival again. You have my word." "And if we fail?" Maya asked. "If we fail," Sebastian said, "then at least we'll have failed together. And maybe that's worth something too." Maya extended her hand, and they shook on it, a formal gesture that sealed an informal partnership between two people who had no business working together and every reason to fail. But as their hands clasped, Sebastian felt something he had not felt since before the hack. He felt like himself again, not the millionaire version of himself, but something older and more fundamental. He felt like a person engaged in meaningful work with another person, pursuing a goal that mattered. "So where do we start?" Maya asked. "We start," Sebastian said, "by accepting that everyone has been asking the wrong question. They've been asking, how did this happen? But we need to ask, why did this happen to me? Because somewhere in that answer is the person we're looking for." They began their work that very night, in the most unlikely of locations, Maya's apartment, a small one-bedroom unit in a building that had stood since before the war and showed every year of its age. Sebastian had never been in such a space before. The walls were thin enough that conversations from neighboring units filtered through like whispers. The radiator clanged with mysterious irregularity, and the kitchen consisted of appliances that belonged in a museum of domestic history. But there was warmth here, a sense of habitation and life that his expensive penthouse had never possessed. Maya's mother, a woman named Rosa, who greeted Sebastian with the careful politeness reserved for strangers whose intentions remain unclear, had already retired to the bedroom, leaving them the small living room with its second-hand furniture and walls covered in photographs and postcards, and Maya's old course certificates from her abbreviated time at university. Maya cleared the coffee table of its usual detritus. Textbooks she still consulted, bills awaiting payment, a half-finished mug of tea gone cold, and they spread out Sebastian's documents like cartographers mapping unknown territory. The lamp overhead cast a circle of yellow light that seemed to hold back the darkness pressing against the windows. And in that light, they began to construct a narrative of destruction. "Tell me about the first indication something was wrong," Maya said, her laptop open before her, fingers poised above the keyboard. "Not the official timeline from your security people, your memory. What do you actually remember about that morning?" Sebastian closed his eyes, forcing himself back to that Tuesday that now seemed to belong to another lifetime. "I woke up at 6, as usual. I checked my phone, which was also usual. There was a notification about unusual account activity. I remember thinking it was probably nothing. We'd had false alarms before. The security systems were always generating alerts about suspicious logins that turned out to be me accessing things from different devices or locations. But this time it wasn't nothing," Maya prompted. "This time, when I tried to log in to verify, I couldn't. The password had been changed, and that's when I felt it, this drop in my stomach, like stepping onto an elevator that descends too quickly. Because my passwords were all unique, all stored in a password manager with two-factor authentication. For someone to change one of them, they would have needed access to my phone, or my authentication app, or my backup codes." "Did you check your phone immediately?" Maya asked, typing rapidly. "Yes, and everything seemed normal. No apps I didn't recognize, no strange messages, nothing downloaded recently. But then I tried to access my email from my laptop, and I was locked out of that too. Then my bank accounts. Then everything else, one after another, like dominoes falling. Within an hour, I had no access to anything digital that mattered." Maya frowned at her screen. "But your phone still worked. You could still make calls." "Yes, though within a few hours, my service was suspended because someone had called my provider and claimed the account had been compromised. They had my account information, my social security number, everything they needed to sound legitimate." "Oh, so they didn't just hack your accounts," Maya said slowly. "They performed social engineering attacks on your service providers. That's actually more impressive in some ways than the technical hacking. It means they knew not just your data, but how to manipulate the human beings who control access to that data." Sebastian watched her work, saw the way her eyes moved across the screen, the way her fingers drummed against the table when she was thinking. There was a quality to her concentration that reminded him of something, though it took him a moment to identify what. It was the same focused intensity he had seen in the most successful entrepreneurs he had funded, the ones who would work through the night on a problem simply because they could not let it go unsolved. "What I don't understand," Maya continued, "is the timing. According to these documents, the attack happened across multiple time zones simultaneously. Accounts in New York were compromised at the same time as accounts in Singapore and London. That suggests either multiple people working in coordination or someone who had set up automated systems to execute the attack all at once. The forensic team concluded it was likely a single person using automated tools," Sebastian said. "They found patterns in the attack that suggested a consistent methodology, a single intelligence behind it rather than a team effort." "Then, this person is patient," Maya said, "and meticulous. This kind of attack requires weeks or months of preparation. They would have needed to gather information about you, map your digital presence, identify vulnerabilities, set up systems to exploit those vulnerabilities, and then execute everything in a coordinated fashion." She looked up at him. "This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was someone who specifically wanted to destroy you. So the question becomes, who would want that and why?" Sebastian had been asking himself the same question for 3 weeks, examining every relationship and business dealing for signs of hidden animosity. "I've made enemies in business," he said. "That's inevitable when you're dealing with the amounts of money I was dealing with. But most of those enemies had no reason to destroy me completely. If anything, keeping me functional served their interests. It was a source of funding, of connections, of opportunities. Dead, I'm worth nothing to anyone. Unless someone wanted you dead for personal reasons rather than business ones," Maya suggested. "What about relationships, romantic entanglements, family conflicts?" "I haven't had a serious relationship in years," Sebastian admitted, feeling the loneliness of that statement more acutely here, in this small apartment where someone's daughter had sacrificed her future to care for her mother, than he had in his penthouse surrounded by expensive emptiness. "My parents are dead. I have one sister, but we haven't spoken in a decade. She's married to an accountant in Ohio and has 3 children and wants nothing to do with my world." "Why don't you speak?" Maya asked, and something in her tone suggested the question mattered. "Because she thought I had become someone unrecognizable," Sebastian said. "She told me the last time we spoke that I had lost touch with what was real, that I lived in a bubble of wealth that had separated me from humanity. She said she didn't want her children to grow up thinking that money was the measure of a person's worth." "She sounds wise," Maya said quietly. "She probably was," Sebastian acknowledged, "but I was too proud to admit it at the time. I told her she was jealous of my success, that she had settled for an ordinary life while I had achieved something extraordinary. I said things I've regretted ever since." Maya was quiet for a moment, and Sebastian could feel her recalibrating her assessment of him. "Could it be her?" she asked finally. "Could your sister have done this?" The thought had not occurred to Sebastian, and it landed like a physical blow. "Elizabeth? No, she's not technical. She barely uses social media, and besides, she would have no way of knowing the details necessary to execute this kind of attack." "But her husband is an accountant," Maya pointed out. "He would understand financial systems. And you said they have children, teenagers presumably, kids who grew up with technology, who might have the skills." Sebastian shook his head, but even as he did so, doubt crept in. Could Elizabeth have been angry enough, hurt enough by their estrangement to orchestrate this? Could she have convinced herself that destroying his wealth was somehow justified, some kind of moral correction? "I don't want to believe it," he said, "but I suppose we should investigate, though I don't even know how to contact her. We've had no communication in 10 years. "We'll figure it out," Maya said, making a note on her laptop. "But we need to cast a wider net. Make a list. Everyone who might have had motive or opportunity. Business rivals, former employees, investors you turned down, companies you didn't fund. Anyone who might have felt wronged by you." For the next 2 hours, they constructed what Maya called a web of possibility. A sprawling document that mapped Sebastian's professional and personal connections, looking for intersections where motive and capability might meet. It was exhausting work, forcing Sebastian to examine his past actions with a critical eye he had never before applied to himself. How many people had he dismissed without consideration? How many promises had he made and failed to keep? How many times had he prioritized profit over people? The list grew disturbingly long. A former business partner who had felt cheated when Sebastian dissolved their partnership. An entrepreneur whose company Sebastian had funded and then abandoned when it failed to meet aggressive growth targets. A woman he had dated briefly and then ghosted when the relationship began to require more emotional investment than he was willing to provide. An intern in one of his companies who had filed a complaint about hostile work environment, a complaint Sebastian had never personally reviewed, allowing his HR department to handle it with a settlement and non-disclosure agreement. "I was not a good person," Sebastian said quietly, when they had finally exhausted the obvious candidates. "Looking at this list, I see that clearly now. I moved through the world, taking what I wanted and discarding what I didn't need. And I told myself it was business. It was just how things worked. It was necessary for success. But these are real people I hurt, real lives I affected. Maya looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. Not condemnation, but not absolution either. The fact that you can see that now matters, she said, though it doesn't undo the harm. But Sebastian, we're not here to catalogue your moral failings. We're here to find who destroyed you. And to do that, we need to think like they think. We need to understand not just who had motive, but who had the specific combination of motive, capability, and psychology to pull this off. What do you mean by psychology? Sebastian asked. Maya closed her laptop and leaned back against the couch, her face thoughtful. This hack wasn't just thorough. It was elegant. Whoever did it took pride in their work. They didn't just steal from you, they systematically dismantled everything you built. That suggests someone who wanted you to suffer, yes, but also someone who wanted to prove they were smarter than you. Someone who needed to demonstrate their superiority. That's not just revenge, that's ego. Sebastian felt something click into place in his mind, a recognition of truth. You're right, he said. This was personal, but it was also a performance. Someone wanted me to know I had been beaten, but they also wanted to beat me in a way that showcased their skills. Which means, Maya continued, we're not looking for someone who just wanted you destroyed. We're looking for someone who needed to destroy you in this specific way, using these specific methods. Someone for whom the how mattered as much as the why. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of this realization settling over them. Then Maya's phone buzzed, a reminder alarm. I need to sleep, she said apologetically. I have a shift starting at 6 tomorrow morning, and I can't afford to be less than alert. But we should meet again tomorrow night. Can you come back here around 8? Of course, Sebastian said, gathering his documents. And Maya, thank you for listening, for thinking about this, for treating me like a person rather than a headline. You are a person, Maya said simply. That's why we're going to catch whoever did this. Because they treated you like a target, like an object to be destroyed. But you're more than that. Everyone is. Sebastian left the apartment building and walked through streets now dark and mostly empty, his mind churning through everything they had discussed. The cool night air helped clarify his thoughts, and as he walked, he had nowhere particular to go, no home waiting for him. As the eviction deadline had now passed, he found himself thinking not about the hack itself, but about the question Maya had raised. Who would need to destroy him in this particular way? He ended up at an all-night diner, the kind of establishment he would never have entered in his previous life, where the coffee was weak and the overhead lighting was harsh. And the other. Patrons were mostly people working night shifts or insomniacs or individuals whose relationship with conventional society had become tenuous. He ordered coffee and a plate of eggs he had no appetite for, and he pulled out a notepad, purchased with the last of his cash, and began to write. He wrote not a list of names, but a profile of the person they were seeking. Patient, meticulous, technically sophisticated, egotistical. Personal connection to Sebastian, or at least personal animosity. Familiar with his habits and patterns, access to information that should have been private, the characteristics emerged slowly, and as they did, Sebastian felt a growing sense of unease. This person knew him intimately. This person had studied him, observed him, perhaps for years, and he had never noticed, never suspected, never felt the weight of that attention. Who watches someone for years without being seen? Who has both the proximity to gather information and the distance to remain undetected? The questions haunted him as the night stretched toward morning, as the diner's other patrons came and went, as the waitress refilled his coffee cup with the weary patience of someone accustomed to providing refuge for the lost. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed absurdly beautiful given his circumstances, Sebastian had reached a conclusion that both terrified and excited him. The person who had destroyed him was someone he had known but not truly seen, Someone who had existed in his orbit, but whom he had dismissed as insignificant. Someone he had underestimated. And if that was true, then Maya's approach was exactly correct. They would not catch this person through technical sophistication. The experts had already tried and failed at that. They would catch them through understanding, through empathy, through the recognition that even the most brilliant hack was ultimately a human action, performed by a human being, with human motivations and human weaknesses. He met Maya again that evening at her apartment, and this time Rosa was present, a small woman with silver hair and sharp eyes who insisted on serving them tea and cookies while regarding Sebastian with the skepticism of a mother protective of her daughter. Maya explained their partnership briefly, and Rosa listened without comment. But Sebastian could feel her evaluation of him, could sense her measuring his worth by standards that had nothing to do with money or status. "You be careful, mija," Rosa said to Maya in Spanish, though she clearly intended Sebastian to understand. "Rich men bring trouble, even when they're not rich anymore." "I know, Mama," Maya replied, also in Spanish, "but he needs help, and I think I can help him. Just don't forget your own needs while you're helping his," Rosa said. And then she retired to her room, leaving them alone with a benediction that felt more like a warning. They returned to their work, but tonight Maya had a different agenda. "I spent today thinking about what we discussed last night," she said, "and I have a theory. But to test it, I need you to give me access to something." "What?" Sebastian asked. "Your social media accounts," Maya said. "All of them. I need to see not what you posted, but who was following you, who was commenting, who was engaging with your content. Because if someone was studying you for a long time, they would have left traces, digital footprints, patterns of attention that might reveal their identity." Sebastian felt a flash of resistance. His social media accounts, even defunct as they now were, felt intensely private, but he pushed past it. He had asked Maya to help him, and that meant trusting her with access to parts of himself he had never shared with anyone. He gave her what login information he still possessed, watched as she navigated through his locked accounts using methods he did not entirely understand, backdoors and cached data and archived pages. "Your Twitter account had 47,000 followers," Maya observed. "But how many of them do you think were real people actually interested in what you had to say versus bots or professional connections maintaining their networks?" "I never thought about it," Sebastian admitted. "I just posted about investments and market trends, and occasionally about whatever charity event I was attending. It was part of my professional image." Maya nodded, unsurprised. Most of social media is performative, but here's what's interesting. There are 17 accounts that engaged with almost every single post you made, not just liking or retweeting, but commenting. Substantial comments, sometimes long ones. And when I look at these accounts, most of them are clearly bots or spam or people trying to sell something. But 3 of them, she paused, her expression growing intense. 3 of them looked like real people who were genuinely following everything you did. And one of them in particular caught my attention. She turned the laptop toward him, showing him a profile. Username, Digital Echo. No profile picture. Bio reading only, observer of systems. The account had been created 7 years ago and had made thousands of comments across various platforms, but the ones on Sebastian's posts were different, more personal, more pointed, sometimes critical, but always informed. "This person knows you," Maya said. "Look at this comment from 3 years ago on a post where you announced a new investment in a cryptocurrency startup." Digital Echo wrote, "Interesting choice, considering your stated skepticism about decentralized systems. But I suppose principles are negotiable when profits are involved." That's not just trolling. That's someone who remembered something you said elsewhere and noticed the contradiction. Sebastian read through more of Digital Echo's comments, feeling increasingly unsettled. The comments revealed an intimate knowledge of his business dealings, his public statements, his patterns of behavior. And woven through them was a thread of something that might have been admiration or might have been its opposite, an obsessive attention that transcribed boundaries. "Can we find out who this is?" Sebastian asked. "I'm working on it," Maya said. "The account is carefully anonymized, but people make mistakes. They slip up. They reuse usernames or link accounts or make connections they don't realize are traceable. Give me time, and I'll find where Digital Echo exists outside of just being Digital Echo." For the next several days, they fell into a routine. Maya worked her delivery shifts, and Sebastian, homeless now, living in cheap hotels that accepted cash and asked no questions, spent his days in libraries and coffee shops, reviewing documents and making notes. They met each evening at Maya's apartment, where they compared findings and constructed theories and slowly, painstakingly, built a picture of the person they were hunting. Digital Echo began to take shape as more than just a username. Maya traced the account's activity across multiple platforms, finding patterns in the times of posting, the subjects of interest, the linguistic patterns. The person behind Digital Echo was educated, probably technically trained, worked irregular hours, had interests that ranged from cybersecurity to philosophy to classic literature, specifically Victorian novels, which Maya found oddly specific. "People reveal themselves in what they love," Maya said one evening when she had discovered Digital Echo commenting extensively on a forum dedicated to Charlotte Bronte. "This person has read Jane Eyre multiple times. They reference it constantly, and they seem particularly interested in themes of justice and revenge and the reversal of power dynamics." "Jane Eyre," Sebastian repeated, the title stirring something in his memory. "My sister loved that book. She read it over and over when we were growing up. She used to quote it at me when she thought I was being arrogant." Maya and Sebastian looked at each other, the same thought occurring to both simultaneously. "We need to find your sister," Maya said. "Even if she's not involved, she might know something. She might have mentioned you to someone, or someone might have used her to gather information about you." Finding Elizabeth proved easier than expected. Maya's internet skills, honed through years of necessity and self-education, located her in Columbus, Ohio, living in a modest suburban home with her husband James and their 3 children. Maya even found Elizabeth's Facebook profile, carefully privacy protected but not entirely invisible. And there, among the photos of family gatherings and school events and ordinary domestic life, they found something that made Sebastian's breath catch. A photo from 2 years ago, Elizabeth with her oldest child, a daughter named Grace, who would have been 16 at the time, standing in what appeared to be her bedroom. And on the wall behind Grace, barely visible but unmistakable to someone looking for it, was a poster for a cybersecurity competition, announcing the regional finals. "Your niece," Maya said slowly. "Is she interested in computers?" "I don't know," Sebastian said, the words feeling inadequate. "I don't know anything about her. I've never met her. I don't even know what she looks like beyond this photo." Maya pulled up more information about the cybersecurity competition. It was a national event for high school students interested in computer science, focusing on defensive and offensive security techniques, essentially teaching teenagers how to both protect and penetrate computer systems. The competition had regional rounds leading to a national finals, with winners receiving scholarships and job offers from major tech companies. "If Grace participated in this competition," Maya said, "she has skills, real skills, the kind that could absolutely be used to execute the hack against you. But she's just a teenager," Sebastian protested, even as he knew the protest was weak. Teenagers had been responsible for some of the most sophisticated cyber attacks in history. Age was no barrier to technical capability, particularly when combined with motivation and time. "We need to talk to your sister," Maya said firmly. "Face to face. We need to know if Grace had any contact with you online, if she knew details about your life, if she had any reason to destroy her uncle for abandoning her mother," Sebastian finished quietly. to punish me for choosing money over family, to prove she was smarter than the millionaire who had dismissed them all as inconsequential. The pieces were falling into place with a horrible inevitability. A brilliant teenager, raised by a mother who had been hurt by her brother's rejection, trained in cybersecurity techniques, familiar with classic literature about reversals of fortune and poetic justice. Someone young enough to be reckless, skilled enough to be dangerous, angry enough to act, but proof, they still needed proof. And more than that, they needed to understand. Because even if Grace had done this, the question remained, why now? What had triggered the attack after all these years? What had transformed whatever resentment might have existed into action? "We need to go to Ohio," Sebastian said, making the decision even as he spoke it. "We need to talk to Elizabeth and find out what Grace knows. But Maya, I can't ask you to come with me. This is my family, my problem. You've already helped more than I had any right to expect." Maya closed her laptop and looked at him with an expression that was both fierce and gentle. "Did we not agree to be partners in this?" she asked. "Did we not shake hands on seeing this through together? I'm coming with you, Sebastian, because this isn't just about you anymore. This is about understanding how someone can be hurt so badly that they decide to destroy another person. And that matters. That's a story that needs to be understood, even if it's painful." And so, it was decided. They would travel to Ohio together, two unlikely partners pursuing a truth that neither fully wanted to find, but both knew was necessary. Sebastian used what little credit he could still access to purchase bus tickets. He, who had once flown first class, now traveling in a vehicle that stopped at every small town between New York and Ohio. Maya arranged time off from her jobs, telling her supervisors she had a family emergency, which was not entirely a lie. The journey took 12 hours, and they spent it alternating between conversation and silence, between planning their approach and simply existing together in the strange liminal space that long-distance travel creates. Sebastian told Maya about his childhood with Elizabeth, about how close they had been before ambition had driven him away from home and family. Maya told Sebastian about her father, who had died when she was young, about how his absence had shaped her understanding of responsibility and sacrifice. When they finally arrived in Columbus, tired and rumpled from travel, the city seemed impossibly ordinary, a place where normal people lived normal lives, untroubled by the dramas of wealth and its loss. They found a cheap motel where Sebastian paid cash for a room with 2 beds, and they rested briefly before setting out to find Elizabeth's address. The house, when they located it the following morning, was exactly what Sebastian had expected. A neat ranch-style home with a small yard, a basketball hoop over the garage door, a minivan in the driveway, all the markers of middle-class American domestic life. Standing before it, Sebastian felt a complex mixture of emotions: regret for the years lost, fear of confrontation, hope that perhaps reconciliation was possible, dread that his worst suspicions might be confirmed. "Are you ready?" Maya asked, and Sebastian appreciated that she did not try to comfort him or assure him everything would be fine. She simply asked if he was ready, treating him as an equal, capable of facing hard truths. "No," he said honestly, "but let's do it anyway." They walked up the path to the front door, and Sebastian rang the bell, and in the moment before it opened, he thought about all the choices that had led him to this moment. Every decision prioritizing success over relationship, every opportunity for connection he had dismissed, every bridge he had burned in pursuit of goals that had ultimately proven meaningless. And he understood, perhaps for the first time, that the greatest hack had not been the one performed on his computers, but the one he had performed on himself, convincing himself that he could live without love, without family, without the very connections that make a human life worthwhile. The door opened, and there stood Elizabeth, older, certainly, her face marked by the years in ways that photographs had not adequately conveyed, but still recognizably his sister. For a moment she simply stared at him, her expression cycling through disbelief, recognition, and something darker that might have been anger or might have been grief. Sebastian saw himself reflected in her eyes, a man diminished, haunted, no longer the arrogant figure who had last spoken to her with such dismissive cruelty. "Sebastian," she said finally, her voice flat, carefully controlled. "I wondered if you would come. When I saw what happened to you in the news, I wondered." "You wondered if I would come," Sebastian repeated, feeling the words land with peculiar weight. "Elizabeth, May we come in? There's someone I'd like you to meet and we need to talk. It's important." Elizabeth's gaze shifted to Maya, assessment flickering across her features. "And who is this?" "My name is Maya Hernandez," Maya said, extending her hand with a directness that Sebastian had come to recognize as characteristic of her approach to difficult situations. "I'm helping Sebastian investigate what happened to him. We have questions that we hope you might be able to answer." Something in Maya's forthrightness seemed to decide Elizabeth. She stepped back from the door, allowing them entry into a home that smelled of coffee and baked goods and the accumulated life of a family. So different from the sterile perfection Sebastian had cultivated in his various residences. The living room was cluttered with the artifacts of children, textbooks and sports equipment, and a video game console connected to a television that had seen better years. Elizabeth gestured for them to sit on a couch that sagged comfortably in the middle, its cushions worn by years of use. "James is at work," Elizabeth said, remaining standing, maintaining the advantage of height in what Sebastian recognized as a protective gesture. "The kids are at school, so whatever you've come to say it now, while we're alone." Sebastian had rehearsed this conversation during the bus ride, had prepared careful words meant to bridge the decade of silence between them. But sitting here in his sister's home, surrounded by evidence of the life she had built without him, all his prepared speeches seemed inadequate. "I need to know if Grace hacked my accounts," he said, abandoning diplomacy for blunt truth. "I need to know if your daughter is the one who destroyed everything I built." The silence that followed was profound. Elizabeth's face drained of color, but what struck Sebastian was that she did not seem surprised. She seemed instead like someone who had been waiting for an accusation she knew was coming. She moved to an armchair and sat down heavily, her hands gripping the armrests. "How did you figure it out?" Elizabeth asked quietly. The confirmation hit Sebastian like a physical blow, even though he had suspected, had half known. But hearing it stated as fact, seeing his sister's lack of denial, it transformed suspicion into terrible reality. "Then it's true," he said. "Your daughter, my niece, whom I've never even met, she did this." "I didn't say that," Elizabeth replied, her voice gaining strength. "I asked how you figured it out. But you need to understand something, Sebastian. You need to understand everything before you make judgments or decisions about what comes next." Maya leaned forward, her expression intent. "We want to understand," she said. "That's why we came, not to accuse, not to demand revenge, but to understand why. Because none of this makes sense unless we understand the why." Elizabeth studied Maya for a long moment, and Sebastian saw his sister making the same assessment he had made weeks ago, recognizing something genuine in Maya, something trustworthy. "You're not what I expected," Elizabeth said to her. "When I saw in the news that Sebastian had lost everything, I imagined he would surround himself with lawyers and investigators, people like he used to be. But you're different. I deliver pizza for a living," Maya said simply, "or I did before this. I'm just someone who happened to bring Sebastian food one night and saw that he needed help, so I'm helping." "Just like that?" Elizabeth asked, and there was wonder in her voice. "You're helping a millionaire who lost his fortune just because he needed help?" "He's not a millionaire anymore," Maya pointed out. "He's just a person. And yes, just like that. Because that's what people do for each other, isn't it? Or what they should do." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at Sebastian with an expression of such complexity, anger and sadness, and something that might have been pride, that he felt his own throat tighten. That's what I tried to teach my children, Elizabeth said. That people matter more than money, that family is more important than success, that we have obligations to each other that transcend our own ambitions. And Grace, Grace, she took those lessons and twisted them into something I never intended. Tell us, Sebastian said softly. Tell us everything. And Elizabeth did. The story emerged slowly, punctuated by pauses when emotion threatened to overwhelm her, but it emerged complete. Grace had always been brilliant, she explained, the kind of child who understood complex concepts before her peers, who saw patterns others missed, who needed intellectual challenges the way other children needed food. When she was 14, she had discovered computers, and it was as if she had found her native language. She taught herself to code, devoured books on cybersecurity, competed in and won regional competitions. Her teachers called her gifted. Her parents called her driven. But what no one had fully understood was that Grace was also angry. She asked about you, Elizabeth said, looking at Sebastian. From the time she was old enough to understand that I had a brother I didn't speak to, she asked why. And I made a mistake, Sebastian. I thought I was being honest with her, thought I was teaching her a lesson about values and choices. But I was also hurt. Still hurt after all those years, and some of that hurt came through when I talked about you. I told her how you had chosen money over family, how you had said terrible things to me, how you had never once asked about my children or my life. I told her these things not to poison her against you, but to explain why we didn't have contact. But Grace, she internalized it differently than I intended. Grace had begun following Sebastian online when she was 15, Elizabeth continued. She had created the Digital Echo account and others like it, watching her uncle's life from a distance, seeing the wealth and the success and the life that seemed to mock everything her mother had taught her about what mattered. She had seen Sebastian post about expensive dinners while Elizabeth struggled with medical bills. She had seen him celebrate new investments while her family worried about college tuition. And she had nursed her anger, her brilliant, dangerous mind turning it over and over until it had hardened into something like hatred. I didn't know the extent of what she was planning, Elizabeth said, her voice breaking. I swear to you, Sebastian, I didn't know. She told me she was working on a project for one of her competitions, something about cybersecurity vulnerabilities. She spent months on it, working late into the night, and I was proud of her dedication. I thought she was building something, not preparing to destroy something. When did you find out what she'd done? Maya asked gently. The morning after it happened, Elizabeth said. She came down to breakfast, and I was reading the news on my phone, and there was an article about you being hacked, and Grace looked at me with this expression, triumph and fear and something wild, and she said, "Justice has been served, Mom. He got what he deserved." And I knew immediately what she had done. Where is Grace now? Sebastian asked, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. Upstairs, Elizabeth said, in her room. She's been suspended from school pending an investigation, not about you, but about some irregularities in her competition entries. The authorities haven't connected her to your hack yet, but it's only a matter of time. She knows I was going to turn her in. We've been fighting about it for weeks. She thinks I'm betraying her, choosing you over her. But I'm not choosing sides, Sebastian. I'm trying to save her from herself. Sebastian felt the weight of this revelation settle over him. His niece, a girl of 17, brilliant and damaged and capable of extraordinary things, had destroyed him, had spent months planning his destruction, had executed it with precision, had believed herself to be serving justice. And now she sat upstairs waiting for consequences that would alter the entire trajectory of her life. I need to talk to her, Sebastian said. No, Elizabeth said immediately. You can't. She's unstable, Sebastian. When I told her I was going to the police, Elizabeth stopped, her hand moving unconsciously to her throat. She scared me. My own daughter scared me. She said things I don't think she meant, but I can't be sure anymore. What things? Maya asked, her expression darkening. She said that if I turned her in, She would release everything, Elizabeth said. She has files, apparently, records of all the information she gathered about Sebastian during her investigation, private information, embarrassing information, things that could hurt people. She said she'd make it all public, that she'd destroy what was left of his reputation completely. And I believe her. When she gets focused on something, when she decides something is just, she'll do anything to achieve it. Sebastian absorbed this, understanding that he was dealing not just with a brilliant teenager, but with someone who had convinced herself that her actions were righteous. Someone who had transformed personal grievance into moral crusade. Someone who, in many ways, was not unlike who he had once been, so certain of their own perspective that other viewpoints became invisible. "I still need to talk to her," Sebastian said. "Elizabeth, she's my niece, she's family. Whatever she's done, whatever damage she's caused, she's still a child who made a terrible mistake, and I'm partially responsible for that mistake. If I had maintained contact with you, if I had been present in her life, if I had been the kind of uncle who sent birthday cards and showed up for school events, maybe she wouldn't have seen me as a symbol of everything wrong with the world. Maybe she would have seen me as a person." "And what would you say to her?" Elizabeth asked. "What could you possibly say that would fix this?" "I don't know," Sebastian admitted, "but I need to try, because the alternative is that she faces criminal prosecution for something she did when she was barely more than a child, motivated by lessons she learned from a mother who was trying to teach her right from wrong, and I can't let that happen without at least trying to reach her." Elizabeth looked at him for a long time, and Sebastian saw in her face the war between maternal protection and recognition of necessity. Finally, she stood. "Wait here," she said. "Let me talk to her first. Let me tell her you're here and that you want to speak with her. If she agrees, I'll bring her down. But Sebastian, don't expect too much. Grace is not the innocent child you're imagining. She's brilliant and angry and utterly convinced of her own righteousness." Elizabeth climbed the stairs, and Sebastian and Maya waited in silence, heavy with anticipation. Maya reached over and squeezed his hand briefly, a gesture of support that needed no words. They could hear voices from upstairs, too muffled to distinguish words, but clear enough to convey emotion. Elizabeth's tone was pleading. Another voice, younger, sharper, responded with defiance. The argument continued for several minutes. Then, footsteps on the stairs. Elizabeth descended first, her face pale. Behind her came Grace, and Sebastian felt his breath catch. She looked so much like Elizabeth had at that age. The same dark hair, the same sharp intelligence in her eyes, the same stubborn set to her jaw. But there was something else there too. Something that made Sebastian's heart ache. She looked exhausted, haunted by what she had done, even as she tried to maintain an appearance of defiance. Grace stopped at the base of the stairs and looked at Sebastian, and he saw her taking his measure, seeing not the millionaire from news articles and social media posts, but the man sitting in her living room, wearing clothes 2 days unwashed with shadows under his eyes and lines of worry etched into his face. He saw confusion flicker across her features, as if the reality of him did not match whatever image she had constructed in her mind. "So you're the famous Uncle Sebastian," Grace said, her voice attempting bravado but not quite achieving it. "The millionaire. Except you're not anymore, are you? How does it feel? To lose everything? To know what it's like to be vulnerable and powerless?" "It feels terrible," Sebastian said honestly. "It feels like drowning. It feels like dying while still breathing. It feels like waking up every morning and having to remember all over again that everything I thought defined me is gone." Grace had clearly expected defensiveness or anger, not this raw admission. She faltered, her expression uncertain. "Good," she said, but the word carried less conviction than she perhaps intended. "Why did you do it?" Sebastian asked, keeping his voice gentle, curious rather than accusatory. "What did you hope to accomplish?" "Justice," Grace said immediately, as if she had been waiting to make this argument. "You had more money than you could ever spend, while Mom struggled to pay for her medical treatments. You lived in luxury, while we worried about making rent. You represented everything wrong with our society. Inequality, greed, the elevation of profit over people. Someone needed to bring you down. Someone needed to show that wealth doesn't make you untouchable. And did it work? Sebastian asked. Did destroying me fix income inequality? Did it help your mother pay her bills? Did it change anything except make you feel powerful for a moment? Grace's face flushed with anger. You don't get to lecture me. You don't get to act like you're the victim here. You're not the victim. You're the person who abandoned his family, who chose money over the people who loved him, who built an empire while his sister and her family struggled. You deserved what happened to you. Perhaps I did, Sebastian said, surprising both Grace and himself. Perhaps there is a kind of poetic justice in losing everything I prioritized over human connection. But Grace, what you did doesn't just hurt me. It hurts you. It hurts your mother. It hurts your future. You're 17 years old. You have your entire life ahead of you and you're about to throw it away because you convinced yourself that revenge was the same thing as justice. I'm not throwing anything away, Grace said, but her voice wavered. I'm standing up for what's right. I'm using my skills to fight against a system that's broken. Maya spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but firm. I grew up poor, Grace. Really poor. My mother and I struggled in ways you probably can't imagine. And yes, there were times when I resented people who had more, who lived easier lives. But destroying them wouldn't have helped me. It wouldn't have paid our bills or cured my mother's illness or given me back the education I had to abandon. It would have just been destruction for destruction's sake, dressed up in the language of justice to make it feel righteous. Grace turned to Maya, seeing her properly for the first time. Who are you? Someone who delivered pizza to your uncle one night and decided to help him, Maya said. Not because he deserved it, not because of who he was, but because he needed help and I was there. That's what you're missing, Grace. Real justice isn't about tearing people down. It's about building people up. It's about making things better, not worse. He doesn't deserve to be built up, Grace said, but her voice had lost its sharp edge. Maybe not, Maya agreed. Maybe he was a terrible person who prioritized all the wrong things and hurt people without thinking about it. But Grace, you spent months studying him, learning everything about his life, preparing your attack. In all that time, did you ever once wonder if there might be more to him than what you saw online? Did you ever consider that he might be capable of change, of growth, of becoming someone different than who he was? Grace was silent, and Sebastian saw in her face the beginning of doubt, the first cracks in the certainty that had sustained her through months of planning and execution. I want to tell you something, Sebastian said. Something I've never told anyone, not even your mother. When I was your age, 17, like you are now, I had a teacher who believed in me, Mr. Hammond. He taught economics, and he saw something in me, some potential I didn't even know I had. He encouraged me, mentored me, helped me get into college even though my family couldn't afford it. He changed the trajectory of my entire life. Sebastian paused, gathering himself for the confession. And you know what I did? Once I became successful, once I had money and connections and everything I thought I wanted, I never contacted him. Not once. He tried to reach me, sent me letters telling me how proud he was, inviting me to speak to his classes. And I ignored everyone because I had moved on, because I was too important, too busy, too focused on building my empire to spend time with an old teacher from a past I wanted to forget. Why are you telling me this? Grace asked, and there were tears in her eyes now, though she was trying to hide them. Because Mr. Hammond died 3 years ago, Sebastian said, his own voice thick with emotion. I found out through a mutual acquaintance. And I realized I would never get to tell him thank you, never get to show him that I remembered what he'd done for me, never get to tell him that despite everything I became, all the ways I failed as a human being, there was still a part of me that was shaped by his kindness. I lost that chance because I prioritized everything else over the relationships that actually mattered. Sebastian leaned forward, looking directly into his niece's eyes so like his sister's, so like his own when he looked in the mirror. Grace, You have a chance to make a different choice than I did. You have a chance to be better than I was. Yes, you've done something terrible. Yes, there will be consequences, but consequences don't have to mean the end of your life. They can mean the beginning of a different kind of life. One where you use your brilliant mind not to destroy people, but to help them. Not to punish people for their flaws, but to help them become better. You make it sound so simple, Grace said, wiping angrily at her tears. Like I can just apologize and everything will be fine. It won't be fine, Sebastian said. Nothing about this is fine. But Grace, I'm not here to demand an apology. I'm here to offer you something I was never capable of offering before. Forgiveness, unconditional, complete forgiveness. Because you're my niece, because you're family, because despite everything you've done to me, I understand why you did it. And I want to help you if you'll let me. Help me. Grace's voice was bitter. How? You don't have any money. You don't have any power. You can't even help yourself. That's true, Sebastian acknowledged. But I can do something more important than give you money or use connections to make this go away. I can give you what you actually need. I can be present. I can be your uncle. I can be someone who shows up and pays attention and treats you like you matter. And I can help you understand that the person you were trying to destroy, the symbol of greed and inequality, was never real. He was a construct, a performance, a role I played because I didn't know how to be anything else. But I'm real. I'm flawed and damaged and trying to figure out how to be a better person. And maybe, if you're willing, we can figure that out together. The room was silent except for the sound of Grace crying. Not angry tears now, but the kind of tears that come when a carefully constructed worldview begins to crumble, when certainty gives way to confusion and confusion begins to evolve toward understanding. Elizabeth moved to her daughter, put her arms around her, and Grace collapsed into her mother's embrace, like the child she still in many ways was. They talked for hours after that. Sebastian and Elizabeth and Grace and Maya, the four of them sitting in that comfortable, cluttered living room, while the afternoon light faded toward evening. They talked about mistakes and consequences, about anger and forgiveness, about the difference between justice and revenge. Grace explained the technical details of her hack with a pride she couldn't quite suppress, and Sebastian found himself genuinely impressed by her skill, even as he recognized the devastation it had caused. Maya asked questions that helped Grace see her actions from perspectives she had never considered. Elizabeth cried and apologized for the things she had said about Sebastian over the years, and Sebastian apologized for giving her reasons to say them. Eventually, they reached a decision that surprised everyone, including Sebastian himself. Grace would confess to what she had done, not to the police, not yet, but to Sebastian himself, formally and completely. She would provide him with access to all the accounts she had compromised, all the tools she had used, everything necessary to undo as much of the damage as possible. And in exchange, Sebastian would not press charges. He would not seek prosecution. He would instead work with Grace to restore what could be restored. And he would take responsibility for his own role in creating the conditions that had led to her actions. But there have to be consequences, Elizabeth insisted. She can't just walk away from this without understanding the gravity of what she's done. The consequences, Sebastian said, are that Grace is going to spend the next several years helping me rebuild. Not my fortune. I'm not sure I want that back, or at least not in the form it took before. But Grace is going to help me build something better, something that actually helps people. He looked at his niece, saw the uncertainty in her face. You spent months figuring out how to destroy me. Now I want you to spend years figuring out how to build something worth having. You're going to use your brilliant mind not to exploit vulnerabilities, but to protect people. You're going to take everything you learned about systems and weaknesses, and instead of using it for destruction, you're going to use it to make things more secure, more fair, more just. And you're going to do it not because I'm paying you or forcing you, but because it's the right thing to do. And if I refuse, Grace asked, though without much conviction, then I go to the police with everything we've learned, Sebastian said. And you face prosecution as an adult for one of the most sophisticated cybercrimes of the decade. And you spend your early 20s in prison instead of building a life. But I don't think you'll refuse. I think you're smarter than that. I think you understand that I'm offering you something rare, a second chance. Grace looked at her mother, then at Maya, then finally back at Sebastian. Okay, she said quietly, I'll help you. But I'm doing it for my mom, not for you. I don't care why you're doing it, Sebastian said. I just care that you do it. They worked through the night, Grace's fingers flying across her keyboard as she undid what she had spent months creating. Sebastian watched in amazement as accounts flickered back to life, as access was restored, as the digital infrastructure of his former existence gradually reassembled itself. Some things were permanently lost, the cryptocurrency that had been transferred to untraceable addresses, certain investments that had been sold and could not be repurchased, reputation damage that could not be undone, but the core of it, the foundation, that could be salvaged. By morning, Sebastian had access to approximately 40% of his former wealth, still an enormous sum by any reasonable measure, still more than most people would accumulate in a lifetime, but a fraction of what he had once possessed. And as he looked at the numbers appearing on the screen, he felt something unexpected. Relief, not at having money again, though he would not pretend that financial security didn't matter, but relief at the recognition that the loss had freed him, had forced him to discover who he was beneath the wealth, had led him to Maya and this partnership and this strange, painful, necessary journey to his sister's home. Thank you, he said to Grace, and he meant it with a depth that surprised him. Thank you for destroying me, because that destruction led me here. And here, I think, is where I needed to be all along. Grace looked at him with an expression that was no longer angry or defiant, but simply young, a 17-year-old girl who had made a terrible mistake and was trying to figure out what came next. What are you going to do now? She asked. Now that you have some of your money back? Sebastian thought about the question, aware that everyone in the room was waiting for his answer. Elizabeth and Grace and Maya, all of them wondering what kind of person would emerge from this ordeal. First, he said, I'm going to pay for your mother's medical care, all of it, past and present and future. That's non-negotiable. Second, I'm going to set up a fund for your education. You're going to finish high school, and then you're going to go to the best computer science program that will accept you, and you're going to become the kind of person who uses technology to help people rather than hurt them. He looked at Maya, saw her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Third, I'm going to honor a promise I made. Maya is going back to school and I'm paying for it, and I'm making sure she and her mother never have to worry about money again. And fourth? Elizabeth asked softly. Fourth, Sebastian said, I'm going to figure out how to be a brother and an uncle and a human being who's present in the lives of people who matter. I'm going to come to Grace's high school graduation. I'm going to show up for family dinners. I'm going to learn my nephews' names and actually know what's happening in their lives. I'm going to do all the things I should have been doing for the past decade, but was too self-absorbed to recognize mattered. And your business? Elizabeth asked. Your investments, your empire? I don't know yet, Sebastian admitted. I think I need to start smaller this time, more carefully, with more attention to what I'm actually building and who it helps and who it harms. I spent years moving money around, funding companies, making bets on the future, but I never stopped to ask what kind of future I was helping to create. Maybe it's time to ask that question. They slept finally, exhausted from the night's work and the emotional toll of confrontation and reconciliation. Sebastian and Maya returned to their motel room as dawn was breaking, neither speaking much, both lost in their own thoughts about everything that had transpired. Maya fell asleep almost immediately, but Sebastian sat by the window, watching the sun rise over Columbus, Ohio. This ordinary city, where his sister had built an extraordinary life, where his niece had both destroyed and saved him, where he had discovered that the greatest wealth had nothing to do with money. When Maya woke several hours later, she found Sebastian still sitting by the window, now working on his laptop. The same old laptop that had survived the hack, the device through which he had first begun to piece together what had happened. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. "Writing," Sebastian said. "A plan, or maybe a confession, or maybe just an attempt to figure out what comes next." Maya came to sit beside him, reading over his shoulder. On the screen was a document titled "Second Chances, a Proposal for Ethical Venture Capital." She read through it, a thoughtful meditation on the responsibility that comes with wealth, on the importance of funding businesses that prioritize people over profit, on the necessity of measuring success by impact rather than return on investment. "You're really serious about this," Maya said. "About changing." "I have to be," Sebastian replied. "Because Grace was right about one thing. I did deserve what happened to me, not because I was evil or malicious, but because I'd lost sight of what mattered. I had become so focused on accumulation that I forgot about contribution. And someone needed to bring me down. I just wish it hadn't been my 17-year-old niece who felt that burden." "She's going to be okay," Maya said with certainty. "She's brilliant, and now she has guidance and direction and family support. She'll take this experience and transform it into something positive. I believe that." "I believe it too," Sebastian said, "though it will take time. Years, probably. But we have time. That's one thing I've learned through all of this. Time is the resource I should have been valuing all along, not money." They returned to New York 3 days later, after spending time with Elizabeth's family, meeting the younger children, James, the accountant husband, who proved to be kind and thoughtful, and not at all threatened by Sebastian's sudden reappearance in his wife's life. Eating meals around a crowded table, experiencing the ordinary rhythms of family life that Sebastian had spent so long avoiding. It was uncomfortable at times, jarring to be part of something so fundamentally different from the solitary existence he had cultivated. But it was also healing in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Back in New York, Sebastian found an apartment, nothing like his former penthouse, but a modest place in a neighborhood where people of different circumstances lived side by side. Maya returned to her own apartment and her mother, but she and Sebastian continued to meet regularly, continuing to work together on the project they had begun, not just recovering from the hack, but building something new from its ashes. Sebastian reconnected with his former business contacts cautiously, aware that his reputation had been damaged, but discovering that some relationships could survive even the most public failures. He began making new investments, smaller than before, but more thoughtful, in companies that aligned with the values he was trying to cultivate. He hired Maya as a consultant and later as a partner, bringing her technical knowledge and ethical clarity to his decision-making process. Grace, true to her word, helped them establish security protocols for everything they built. She worked remotely from Columbus, balancing her high school courses with the mentorship Sebastian provided, gradually transforming from the angry teenager who had destroyed him into a young woman discovering how to use her formidable skills constructively. The relationship between them remained complicated, sometimes contentious, always honest, but it was real in a way that Sebastian's previous professional relationships had never been. 2 years after the hack, Sebastian sat in his modest apartment preparing for Grace's high school graduation. Maya was there with him, helping him select a gift, not something expensive they had agreed, but something meaningful. They had settled on a vintage copy of Jane Eyre, the book that Grace loved, with a note inside, for understanding both revenge and redemption, and for knowing the difference, with love from your uncle. "Do you ever regret it?" Maya asked, as they wrapped the book. "Losing what you had? Sometimes I wonder if you wouldn't have been happier staying who you were." Sebastian considered the question honestly. "I miss certain things," he admitted. "I miss the ease of never having to think about money, the freedom that comes with knowing you have resources to handle any problem. But happy? I don't think I was happy, Maya. I was successful. I was accomplished. I was envied. But I wasn't happy. I didn't know how to be happy because I didn't know how to be connected to anything real. He looked at her, this woman who had delivered him pizza one night and then delivered him back to himself. Now I know my nephews' names. I know what Grace is studying and what her dreams are. I know Elizabeth's struggles and her joys. I know your mother's favorite foods and the stories she tells about when you were young. I know these things because I'm present for them, because I show up, because I've learned that the greatest wealth is being known and knowing others. And that makes me happier than any amount of money ever did. Maya smiled, that genuine smile he had first seen in his building's lobby, what felt like a lifetime ago. You know what I think? I think Grace actually did you a favor. She destroyed the person you were so you could become the person you needed to be. That's a strange kind of gift, but it's a gift nonetheless. Then I should probably thank her, Sebastian said, though I doubt she'd believe me. She might surprise you, Maya said. People do when you give them the chance. They drove to Ohio for Grace's graduation, and Sebastian sat with Elizabeth and James and the younger children in the auditorium, watching as his niece crossed the stage to receive her diploma. Grace had been accepted to MIT's computer science program on a full scholarship. Between Sebastian's support and her own exceptional abilities, she had secured her future. But more than that, she had secured a purpose. She was going to study cybersecurity with the goal of helping protect vulnerable systems and people from the kind of attack she had once perpetrated. After the ceremony, as families crowded around graduates with flowers and cameras and tears of joy, Grace found Sebastian. She stood before him uncertainly, this young woman who had destroyed and saved him. And then she did something unexpected. She hugged him, brief and awkward, but real. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me a second chance when I didn't deserve one." "We all deserve second chances," Sebastian replied. "The question is whether we're brave enough to take them." That evening, they gathered at Elizabeth's house for a celebration, not just of Grace's graduation, but of family reunited, of wounds beginning to heal, of the strange and painful path that had led them all to this moment. Sebastian stood in the kitchen helping Elizabeth prepare food, an ordinary domestic task he had never imagined performing, and felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to his eyes. "Are you okay?" Elizabeth asked, noticing his emotion. "Better than okay," Sebastian said. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm actually here, present, not thinking about the next deal or the next acquisition or the next achievement, just here, helping my sister make dinner for a family celebration." Elizabeth put down the knife she had been using to slice vegetables and embraced him, the first time they had truly hugged in more than a decade. "I'm glad you came back," she said. "I'm glad Grace's terrible decision led to something good. I know that sounds strange, but it's true. We needed you, and you needed us, and sometimes it takes destruction to reveal what needs to be built." "She learned that from you," Sebastian said. "The idea that justice means building rather than destroying. Grace learned that from you, even if it took her a while to understand it." "And you're teaching her too," Elizabeth replied. "You're showing her that people can change, that mistakes don't have to define us, that it's never too late to become who we should have been all along." "That's a powerful lesson, Sebastian. Don't underestimate what you're giving her." They returned to the party, and Sebastian found himself in conversation with his youngest nephew, a 10-year-old boy named Thomas, who had never known his uncle Sebastian existed until 2 years ago, and who now chatted enthusiastically about his uncle's visits and the stories Sebastian told, and the way Sebastian actually listened when Thomas talked about his interests. And Sebastian realized that this ordinary moment of connection with a child who trusted him, who had no agenda,